We treat aging as a biological countdown. The graying of hair, the wrinkling of skin, these are seen as a strictly linear process, a one-way street of inevitable decline. But under a microscope, we actually see instances where that dark pigment floods back into a totally white strand of hair. To understand why that observation is so startling, we have to look back at the scientific optimism of the 1990s. Researchers believed mapping out our DNA would reveal a specific gene for cancer, a gene for heart failure, a gene for schizophrenia. The assumption was that our health destiny, and how quickly we decline, was hard-coded into us from birth. That heavy focus on the genome created a massive blind spot. Because we expected to find a predetermined blueprint, we mistook our body's flexible responses to its environment as permanent, irreversible decay. Think about a typical human head. It contains roughly 100,000 individual hairs, and every single one is a genetically identical twin. They all share the exact same environment. They're exposed to the same diet, the exact same exercise routine, and the same systemic stress levels. Yet, despite those identical inputs and identical genetics, some of those hairs lose their pigment when a person is in their late 30s, while neighboring hairs survive completely intact into their 80s. Researchers looking closely at this discrepancy found something that should be impossible. They identified single strands of hair that grew out dark, turned completely white for a segment, and then went back to being entirely dark. If aging was a simple one-way genetic switch flipping off, a hair could never regain its full pigmentation naturally. There has to be an entirely different mechanism at play. Hair grows constantly, meaning the physical structure of a single strand is essentially a timeline. The tip of a long piece of hair represents your body's state months in the past, while the root sitting right at your scalp is the immediate present. This compares a tree trunk to a hair strand. Just as tree rings encode historical droughts, hair encodes biological data as it grows. Researchers mapped the physical strand against a fluctuating line graph, similar to an EEG, where sharp dips pinpointed when it lost pigment. By extracting data from what was once considered dead protein, researchers unlocked a continuous molecular timeline of human psychological states. One participant provided an incredibly clear example. She was a young woman with dark hair, but she submitted a strand that featured a stark 2-centimeter band of bright white right in the middle, sandwiched between fully pigmented sections. Researchers asked her to look back at her calendar over the previous 12 months. She plotted out her psychological stress on a separate graph, rating her daily life from 0 up to maximum stress, creating a purely psychological record of her year. According to her chart, she experienced a severe 2-month psychological crisis. It began after submitting her PhD thesis at Stanford, coinciding with a relationship breakdown. Eventually, the crisis resolved. She moved across the country to New York City, settled into a new routine, and secured a new job. When researchers laid her psychological graph over the digital scan of her hair, the 2-month period of intense crisis aligned perfectly with that exact 2-centimeter band of white. Intense psychological events dictate cellular output in real time. Every psychological event triggers a heavy biochemical cost inside the body. Biological events like mounting an immune response to inflammation or enduring prolonged psychological distress drain immense amounts of cellular energy reserves. When researchers chopped up these single hairs to perform proteomics, studying all the proteins inside a cell, they found that the white sections of the hair were heavily overloaded with mitochondrial proteins. Mitochondria are the structures responsible for generating a cell's energy. Producing color takes energy. When a cell is overwhelmed by the high energetic cost of a stressful event, it undergoes an economic triage. The mitochondria abandon non-essential tasks, like hair pigmentation, just to keep the cell alive. What happens inside a hair follicle is a highly visible proxy for how the entire human body ages. This chart shows the breakdown of human longevity. The data contradicts the genetic assumptions of the 90s. At most, only 7% of how long you live is dictated by inherited genetics, leaving a massive 93% driven by lifestyle, environment, and exposures. The overwhelming majority of biological aging comes down to energetic upkeep. How well your cells handle the demands of external inputs determines how quickly they degrade. Biological aging is not a one-way trip to physical decline. Because our bodies respond dynamically to the energetic demands we place on them, the aging process inherently contains the plasticity to be temporarily reversed.